You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Welcome, Star Wars fans. I'm Connor.
And I'm Alex.
And today we're going to take a look at a kind of broad topic of sentient aliens in the Star Wars universe. We've already talked about non-sentient monsters, but we're taking a look at anyone who's not a I don't want to say normal-looking person, but
Well, human, Connor. The word is human, and humans are, in Star Wars, a prevalent species making up a significant portion of the galactic population. Both, from a Doyle's perspective, because all the people who made Star Wars are humans, and you don't want to have everyone in makeup all the time.
Just look at Dark Crystal. There's not a human in that movie; it's all puppets.
Yeah, from a Watsonian perspective, it's because humans have a cultural and biological imperative to go and spread out and colonize other systems, which many other species don't share or do not share to the same degree.
And in Star Wars, we start off with mostly humans until we meet a couple shorter figures with cloaks who could be humanoid, but we're not quite sure. Those are the Jawas. They don't speak a common basic language that humans in the real world can understand, but it's our first step into something alien in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, so let's take a step back and look at this in a broader perspective. So, Star Wars, the galaxy of Star Wars as a whole, is populated, in theory and in actuality, you believe in, as you take in the universe, by thousands of different species. Humans make up a plurality, it seems, in many of the systems and planets, but they are hardly the only sentient race. And today we are specifically going to talk about those near human species that are both more common in the older and more recent canon of Star Wars, and just what are their differences and what either sci-fi role or specific reason do they exist, whether that's just to look cool, which is entirely fine from a Star Wars perspective, whether they're trying to mimic some kind of real world culture and say something about racial or ethnic identity, or whether it's doing something wholly unique to Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. And Alex is going to be able to give you the name, the home world, just the culture of the species. I'll be able to say it's the blue one with the red eyes, or it's the one that looks like the Wolfman. But you'll get a full picture that way on the significant races in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, so let's start with just these near human alien species and where they appear in Star Wars, and some of the most recognizable characters that are of that species, both in the films and in other media.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start with one of the species, the alien races, that is supposed to be more common, not as prevalent as humans, but certainly more prevalent than a more obscure species.
So these are the species that play a larger part?
Yeah, a larger part in the Star Wars universe as a whole. Yeah. So starting with the Twi'leks.
This would be your Bib Fortuna, your Jabba the Hutt's right-hand man, the tentacled, sharp-mouthed, just odd-looking individual.
Yeah, so Twi'leks, hailing from the planet of Ryloth, are characterized by having, they're called head tails, or leku, that fall down over their shoulders. Bib Fortuna, the major domo of Jabba the Hutt, it being a prime example. Other examples recognizable to most Star Wars fans would be the Jedi Master Aayla Secura from the Clone Wars period.
Jabba's slave lady, who's green and dies at the hands of the Rancor.
And then if you're going into more Legends material, your party member in Knights of the Old Republic, Mission Vow, is a Twi'lek, as is her good-for-nothing brother Griff. So Twi'leks have a... one, because I believe the costuming for Twi'leks is relatively simple compared to someone like, say, Chewbacca, who requires a full body suit. Though I will continue to my typical Watsonian perspective shortly. But yeah, Twi'leks from the desert and jungle planet of Ryloth in the Outer Rim. They appear to have their cultural mores are varied. They are sided with the Republic during the Clone Wars as a people. We often see female Twi'leks working as like dancers, as they appear in as the Twi'leks appear in Jabba's palace. This appears to be almost serving the same role as the Asari do in Mass Effect, where they are, independent people, but either fetishized or seen as attractive by many different races.
Even Ayla Secura has one of the most unrealistic, revealing outfits for a Jedi Master. I don't think the Jedi need to bare their midriffs. Like, I don't want to see Quinlan Voss or Qui-Gon Jinn with a, robe that ends at their pecs.
Well, I think part of that is, again, we're going to touch on some cultural mores that are a little different here, and sometimes, oh, it's just their culture is a great excuse for a male filmmaker to put a female character in a skimpy outfit, such as Leia's slave outfit, or again, probably the midriff bearing outfit of Jedi Master Ayla Secura, who, as you see in the Clone Wars, is no less a wise Jedi Master than anyone else who was on the Jedi Master at the time.
Which brings to mind, small point, it seems like the Twi'leks speak with French accents in their frequent depictions.
Well, another main character that is a Twi'lek is Hera Syndulla, who will be appearing as a main character. It appears in the upcoming Ahsoka show and was a main character in Star Wars Rebels. And through her, we learn a great deal about Twi'lek society, from the practice of eating a Kalikori, an object that gives the lineage of their family, to how their family units live on their home planet, their unique spiritual traditions. So we get a great deal more information about Twi'leks and how they have thick native accents that some suppress when they leave their home planet, and a notable and touching instance of code switching. We see Hera Syndulla, who normally speaks in a fairly standard galactic accent, switch back into her thicker pseudo-French sounding native Ryloth accent when confronting her father.
Interesting. So any other thoughts on the Twi'leks and their inclusion into Star Wars and what they bring to the table?
So I think they're intended to show that there are near human races that are similar to humans. They have their own different home planet. They have their own traditions and culture. And, they look, hey, the hell head tail Leku thing looks kind of cool and is an easy way to give some visually distinct aliens in the setting.
While still having a generally human-looking face so that the portrayers can emote and act.
Yeah, so that is our take on the Twi'leks, the passionate and survivor-style people that live from the planet of Ryloth. Next on our docket is another relatively prominent non-human species that we have several main characters to talk about. That would be the Zabrak people.
And are they native to the planet Dathomir?
So there are two branches of the Zabrak people. The Dathomiri Zabrak, who are dominated by the Night Brothers and Night Sisters, and who have a great deal of sexual dimorphism, with the Night Sisters being hornless and still pale-skinned, but non-human, and the Zabrak males from the Night Brothers being the species that Darth Maul hails from. Zabrak they have two hearts, giving them a very robust physiology. They have horns on their heads that some just leave naturally like horn-like, and some almost carved down like Maul does into these sharp, violent points.
And they're not. Are they born? I should say. I believe Darth Maul got tattooed. That is why he is red and black. We do have some Jedi characters who I believe are Zabrak with the softer horns, but they don't have the same sort of color. They have similar markings to the tattoos, though.
Yeah, so Zabrak have a cultural tendency towards tattoos of different kinds, depending on their people and homeworld. And really, the two branches of the Zabrak species have different physiological and cultural traditions, which is interesting to know and see the exploration of, in that the two branches of the species I do not believe get along very well. The Dathomiri Zabrak, who are dominated by the Night Sisters of Dathomir, and the Night Brothers, who Maul hails from, are insular, largely confined to their own planet, and live in sort of this matriarchal, Force-dominated society with they call the use of the Force magic, and the Night Brothers have a strong martial and rather murderous tradition that they follow themselves. But this is not portrayed in an entirely unrealistic way, in that it seems kind of cultish, but we see actual bonds between characters, and the way in which it's almost like you have a bunch of like nuns over here and a bunch of monks over here, and
Hmm.
they get together and they procreate now and then. Um,
But it's a flipped around kind of relationship where it's much more matriarchal, and the nuns hold the power, and the monk priests are subservient.
yeah, and then we get the other branch of Zabraks, who are the Iridonian Zabrak people, and they are filling a similar role almost to the Twi'leks that we just previously discussed. They are a near human race, mostly um, different from humans by the horns upon their heads, and known for their stoic yet passionate demeanor, where they can be very stoic, and then if when something um, gets under their skin or they feel passionate about, they can commit to the cause fully. Prominent Zabrak characters that we meet in various media, other than Darth Maul. If you look back to Legends again, we have Baudur from Knights of the Old Republic 2, who is another companion. We have Jasamari, who is a Zabrak bounty hunter who appears in the Aftermath trilogy. We have former Jedi Master Eth Koth, who
That's
is
what I was thinking of.
who was murdered by Darth Vader, as many Jedi Masters were.
Mhm.
So, the Zabrak are known, for their passionate emotions, and the Dathomiri Zabrak people have embraced this, and then the Iridonian Zabrak have largely integrated themselves into galactic society. And this is an example of like, hey man, in alien, like they look like humans, but they got these like horns on their heads, and they're like, kind of really emotional all the time, but then they live longer and they have two hearts. I mean, that just sounds, it's like sci-fi. Hey, that sounds cool. Let's make some
Hmm.
characters that look like that.
Yeah. You'll find them as a common enemy in Fallen Order.
Yeah, where, Zabrak is hailing from a planet that's, from Iridonia, might seek opportunities for as pirates or scalawags. All right, so I would say that would be the Zabraks, who are also probably fairly recognizable, at least with Darth Maul as their face, anyone might know who he
Mm.
is. And then you're like, yeah, he's a. But then if you know he's a Dathomiri Zabrak, not an Iridonian Zabrak, if you
Mm.
know the meaning of that, thank you. You're in the
Elite
you're
tier.
you're 3 levels down on our iceberg meme here. So congratulations. All
So,
right.
what about Wookiees? Would you consider Wookiees to be their own?
Oh yeah, Wookiees are certainly another species, and I believe they're worth talking about
Mm.
here because we have a main character through all 9 of our core, or you know, 10
Oh.
of our 11 current Star Wars films as a main character,
Mm.
Chewbacca. So the Wookiees, I would not say are near human in that they cannot even speak Galactic Basic. They have their own language, Shirwook, which I'm probably butchering, Star Wars fans. I am aware.
Their whole entire, I mean, cult or language is based off of hard consonant sounds that humans aren't meant to pronounce. So even their home planet of Kashyyyk is difficult to pronounce and read. Uh, but they have of course, like a tribal kind of lifestyle, and we see their planet featured prominently in Revenge of the Sith. And do they show up much? I know they have a minor arc in the Clone Wars on Kashyyyk. Do they show up in the Bad Batch or Rebels or anything like that?
Yes, there is an arc on the Bad Batch that takes place on Kashyyyk as the Empire, as many people do, due to the extremely resource-rich nature of Kashyyyk and its Rosher trees, which
Mhm.
can be used in a variety of industries. The Empire conquers Kashyyyk again and enslaves Wookiees again.
Mhm.
They are very tired of being conquered and enslaved, but because of their inherent strength and the valuable nature of the resources on their planet, is often a threat for Wookiees. And here we see a more direct, almost if not allegory, at least parallel to how um, peoples and different traditions might be marginalized or subjugated by a
Mhm.
stronger, faceless, either corporate or government force in the real world in the form of the Wookiees, who are, portrayed as having their own unique traditions, being closer to nature, being long lived and mystical in some of their beliefs, not certainly morally elevated in any way. We know plenty of violent and dangerous Wookiees,
Mhm.
but living in a different lifestyle, and many of them just want their lifestyle to be respected, and it is often not.
And I mean, the galaxy sees them as almost feral creatures. You know, they fear Wookiees. Han Solo makes mention that, Wookiee will tear your arm off if you beat him in a game. But then you also see some of the softer sides to the Wookiee culture. In Solo, we get to see Chewbacca work to try to free some of his brethren. And we also get the first introduction of a holiday in Star Wars through the Wookiees with Life Day. If you'd like to learn out more, I'm going to just say Wikipedia Life Day and find out the history and where it came from.
Do not watch the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Watch it.
Connor is more masochistic than I am.
It's canon. It's full canon. First introduction to Boba Fett, baby.
Yeah. Other prominent Wookiee characters that we would see would include Black Chrysanthemum, who appears first in Dr. Aphra as a bounty hunter she employs, and then sort of as her right hand for a while. And then it shows up in the Book of Boba Fett, who is then employed by our eponymous nascent crime lord, who is absolutely crazy and violent. He's been cast out of his own society, forced to fight as a gladiator, has fully embraced his violent side, and truly believes he just will find death someday, but will kill a lot of people first. So he's another prominent Wookiee character, which makes, at least it doesn't leave Chewbacca doing the work of being the sole representative of his entire species in the broader canon.
Mm-hmm. In Legends, there's Lobaka. He is a nephew of Chewbacca with a black streak in his hair, with a bronze lightsaber, as he is one of Luke Skywalker's Jedi students.
All right, but there are other canon Wookiee Jedi, most notably appearing in the Clone Wars.
I pulled up a list and Lobaka was first on it.
So I'm trying to find the one I actually want to talk about. Gunji, who appears in the Bad Batch again after surviving Order 66. We have seeing his fusion of Wookiee tradition in making his wood-handled lightsaber with Jedi tradition, and then his attempt to return to his own people and survive under the weight of the Empire, being another insight into Wookiee culture and their existence in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm. And we'll be getting a Wookiee Jedi in the show Acolyte, which is set during the High Republic.
Right. So, other near-human or sentient species that are prominent. We'll quick talk about the Pantorans, who are basically blue humans with sort of gold markings on their face from the planet of Pantora. They appear in the Clone Wars, Senator Chuchi being one of the representatives.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that the George Lucas species? Doesn't he show up as one of these aliens?
I believe so. I believe George Lucas was the Pantoran senator or Pantoran representative in the background of one of the...
I think it was Revenge of the Sith, and then he featured in one episode of the Clone Wars with his family.
Yeah, we don't know a lot about the Pantorans. They're just an example, I think, of let's throw some blue paint on this person's face. And we don't really get a lot about their culture other than they both have a strong military bent, but also as representative assembly, and that they are a close ally of the Republic and integrated fairly closely enough that Pantorans are able to serve in the Imperial military with little difficulty, even with their typical hatred of non-humans.
And speaking of blue species, what's the species that Cad Bane is? Because we get two versions of him. Okay. It is
Cad Bane is a Duros.
Yeah, that is your typical bald, no-nosed, big-eyed. It's your typical gray in alien, culture. But in the case of this guy, it's a blue man instead of a gray or a green one. They show up in the famous cantina scene of A New Hope, and Cad Bane is a representative of their species, the bounty hunter. God, right. I don't know if there's anything else that's interesting about them.
Yeah, so Duros, they are not as emotive as other species.
Due to the makeup.
Force sensitivity is relatively rare among them, but it does exist, as with most sentient creatures. And then there's a famous Duros master of the Sith, Darth Kaldoth in canon, who had his apprentice try to kill him, and then he turned his apprentice to stone. And then the Night Sisters of Dathomir tried to kill him, and then he captured one of their souls and kept it as a plaything. So Darth Kaldoth, not a great guy. And then there are other Duros in the rebellion, as the Duros were not particularly well treated by the Empire. So there was
Yeah.
Shriv, um, leader of Danger Squadron, then an Inferno Squadron, and New Republic and the Resistance. And then my favorite, Lulo Lampar, um, who would later serve with Poe Dameron in Black Squadron as part of the Resistance, and who also appears uh, in the Poe Dameron comic.
And then we have another blue species. It's a popular color, known as the Chiss.
So here's one where we can actually talk about a fairly well realized culture and society outside the Republic, largely thanks to the efforts of Timothy Zahn. So the Chiss are characterized by their blue skin, glowing red eyes,
But
and
unlike the Duros, they actually look human.
yeah, humanoid in most respects. So again, a near human race similar to the Twi'leks or Pantorans or Zabrak. Yeah, but aside from their dark hair, blue eyes, or blue skin, red eyes, they are known for their arrogance, the absolute conviction in their own, belief in their own cultural and military superiority over other races, um, without being only being moderately imperialistic about it, and also for having a relatively complex honor and face and family-based society that keeps them both bound together in the far reaches of beyond the outer rim, but then also, sometimes cripples them against outside threats that attempt to take advantage of the inherent divisions in just society. The most prominent canon member of the Chiss is Grand Admiral Thrawn, or if I attempt to pronounce his Chiss name, Mithran Uodo, uh, with Thrawn being his core name, is what people call him. So he will be very prominent, I believe, in the Ahsoka show as portrayed by Lars Mikkelsen. And we do not, their species and culture are expanded upon in great length in the Thrawn trilogy, the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. So if you want to learn about the Chiss, and where pretty much every main character in the books is a Chiss of one kind or another, go read those.
And yeah, they're one of the few explored alien races that have their own Force tradition. Where you've told me they don't have Jedi and Sith. Their use of Force users is very utilitarian, where they're used as navigators known as Skywalkers.
That's the direct translation of the Chiss word, yes, which when Grand Admiral Thrawn meets Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars, he's just Captain Mithranudo at that point. Um, he finds Anakin's name to be quite amusing. But they do not know how to continue to foster the Force tradition among their own people, and so it fades out after from their Force sensitive children. Meaning, there's a relatively controversial practice of sort of pseudo child soldiers who work as navigators for their warships, using the Force to be able to navigate ships in a society that does not have droids or hyperspace computers.
Very Dune-like, but in a more totalitarian, frightening way.
Yeah, and it's yet to be seen if the Chiss end up being a neutral force, allies, or enemies of the New Republic, or whatever fractured series of states and statelets and planets sort of take its place after the fall of the First Order and Final Order and the rise of Skywalker. Right. Just going over a few other species, also probably familiar to most of our listeners, would be Rodians. They are a glowing, almost insectoid-eyed, blue and green-skinned race. The most notable Rodian that is probably known to most of our listeners would be Greedo, who is shot and killed by Han Solo after being threatened in the cantina at the start of A New Hope.
I think we see a brown Greedo, or brown Rodian rather, in the background of Rogue One. I don't know if we get to see much of their species outside of Greedo.
Um, the senator of their home planet of Rhodia is a prominent friend of Padme Amidala
Mm-hmm.
and what is one of her political mentors.
Isn't that her uncle?
Honorary uncle,
Yeah,
yes. And what is his name?
something dumb. Because I like the episode, but I hate his stupid name that Padme was calling him Uncle something.
Yeah. Anaconda Farr, so Senator Farr from the Clone Wars, as a relatively prominent character in that arc during the Clone Wars, is a mentor for Padme, and we do see more of their jungle-like planet, and it looks dangerous and uncomfortable, and I'm not surprised many Rodians leave.
Mm-hmm. So, other sort of like commonly featured species, we have the Mon Cala, or the Mon Calamari, as they were known in legends. That is your Admiral Akbar fish species, which consists of, I think, two different
No,
separate species,
so the
or
planet of Mon Cala, and
yeah,
unfortunately, the name Mon Calamari is still canon.
great.
Uh, yeah. So Mon Cala, which is the home planet of both the Mon Calamari and the Quarren species. So Admiral Akbar is a Mon Calamari, a species, they look almost a squid-like people with large bulbous eyes and squid-like heads, but
Mhm.
that prefer a humid climate. They are the race that had crafted and built most of the ships that the rebellion uses. Anything that looks like it's sort of bulbous and aquatic, yeah, that was made by the Mon Calamari.
Yeah.
So they're renowned shipbuilders. We even see this propensity for ship repair and building shown in the book of in the Mandalorian, when Din Djarin hires a mechanic from Mon Cala to fix the Razor Crest, and is able to do so on limited budget and resources, not to the aesthetic that Din Djarin would prefer, but in a functional way.
Mhm. Man, those Mon Calamari cruisers are some of the just coolest ships visually. I think they showed up in Empire Strikes Back first and were featured heavily in Return of the Jedi. Returning for the sequel trilogy as um, Admiral Akbar and his nephew feature moderately.
Yeah, we actually see an attempt to win Mon Calamari support for the Resistance in several expanded materials when the Resistance is almost destroyed after the events of The Last Jedi. Only it turns out the First Order has a mole in the ranks of the Quarren members of the Mon Cala court. So we learn much more about the Mon Calamari culture and political system than we do about some of these other races, other than perhaps the Chiss and the Twi'leks, because we spend time there during various shows.
Mhm.
We see the succession crisis when Prince Lee Char is forced to take leadership over his people during the Clone Wars. And then on his deathbed, when Leia approaches him needing help during the rebellion period, desperately helps some ships escape to join the rebellion, leading to a brutal bombardment of Mon Cala, and then subsequent suppression of their planet during the remainder of the Imperial period. And then, as we previously discussed, Mon Cala also has another intelligent race that lives there, the Quarren, who are,
Kind
rather
of
than sort of,
tentacly.
yeah, they have tentacle
Hmm.
like beard faces, um, and they're sort of in an antagonist role, but they're more portrayed as just having perhaps been sidelined or subjugated, culturally at least, by the Mon Cala, and so they have a chip on their shoulder.
I think they're visually seen more in the prequels, if I'm right. Because I think I remember seeing some of them on the Senate.
Yeah, the Quarren have their own representatives in the Senate. They're their own distinct species from the Mon Cala, and they are always in conflict with the Mon Calamari about the rights and you know political system present on the planet. And then we also see some Quarren attempt to kill Din Djarin and the Mandalorian,
Mhm.
because um, sometimes they lean into. Sometimes Star Wars leans into this is the villainous species, which is not an approach I particularly enjoy, but
Mhm.
it's there.
Like our dog face race from the Mandalorian focused episode of the book Boba Fett, where all the aliens are men with dog faces. Some of these alien species aren't featured in this episode because they show up in instances like this where they're fodder.
Yeah, and we prefer when we actually, yeah, the use of an alien race is not used to make them the other, but is instead just to make them different and distinct.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but which Star Wars, as being a very broad media franchise, sometimes does well and sometimes does not do well.
It developed the Tusken Raiders, which I would consider to be an alien type species because we don't see their face. In Legends, they appear humanoid. I don't know if that's been developed in canon, though.
Now, the current biggest canon exploration of the Tusken culture that we see has been in the Book of Boba Fett,
Mm-hmm.
where Boba Fett becomes an honorary member of a Tusken tribe, a less warlike and more um, diplomatic
Sure.
tribe, even though they are themselves not particularly friendly. Uh, and the Tuskens are probably the most direct allegory for a real world culture in that
Mhm.
they are heavily drawing on influences from Native Americans, with their insular culture, insisting on speaking their own language, following their own religion. You even have a sort of a Dances with Wolves subplot with Boba Fett, where he then joins the clan after being captured by them and learning their ways.
Mhm. But it's, Star Wars as an example of taking that vilified race who, was sent to threaten Luke, who Anakin kind of mass murdered. Uh, it gives them a little bit more depth. Their portrayal in the Book of Boba Fett and makes them appear more human. I don't think it's any mistake that George Lucas chose the Tusken Raiders for Anakin to slaughter because they don't have human faces and just things that we can identify with. It's this villainous race that he's cutting up. So
But it is still portrayed as
yeah,
a horrifying act when
oh
he
yeah,
slaughters the entire village of Tuskens. But it's like, oh, he killed an orphanage full of puppies rather than. But then later in the thing, he's like, then he went to the actual orphanage and killed like the real orphans,
yeah.
at the Jedi Temple. It's like,
Hmm.
no, he killed the last movie. He killed more children. This is not new for
Hmm.
Anakin.
Yeah,
They were still children, even if they were not human.
right. They just weren't
Um,
the ones that we were fighting for at that point. But
Yeah, so let's pick one more species today, Connor, just to look at all these Star Wars aliens.
I think
What else is most distinct or feels most iconic when you think about Star Wars? If you don't pick one, I will.
I was gonna just bring up like trying to think of aliens that show up more as not just like a Kit Fisto, who there are no aliens like Kit Fisto even on screen. I would say the Neimoidians for the plot or for the role they play in the plot of the prequels.
Ah, yes, the Neimoidians, who a part of their culture and part of their society founded the Trade Federation,
Mhm.
as they have a very mercantile society.
Unfortunately, it is possible to read some stereotypical Asian coding or some anti Semitism in the depiction of the Neimoidians.
But as they are depicted in canon, the Neimoidian culture was greatly expanded upon in the
Mhm.
novel Brotherhood, which explores the early relationship of Obi-Wan and Anakin after Anakin becomes a Jedi Knight and is hiding his secret marriage to Padme, when Obi-Wan is dispatched on a mission of peace to Neimoidia to stop that planet from entering the war on the Trade Federation side. Because while the Trade Federation is nominally neutral, there's a splinter extremist faction that's totally not being supported by the whole that has joined the Separatists, and then there's a terrorist attack on Neimoidia that threatens to drive them into the arms of the Separatists. And we learn about their arch, their culture, their society of risk calculation that's sort of biologically encoded in them in a different cultural moray and way compared to humans. And Obi-Wan's learning to understand their culture and their beliefs. So, yeah, and Neimoidians physically, they have sort of Salos, not Sal. They have like
They're almost like your typical alien, your typical like green alien
yeah, they
with
got
the
gray and green skin. They
yeah
have
sort of
uh,
solid colored eyes.
long chins and sort of
Mhm.
like bulbous aquatic-looking eyes with
Mhm.
vertical pupils.
Yeah.
So, but again, no less individuals and people for that, for all the reason that I mean, Anakin Skywalker knows that he's racist against Neimoidians, and later in life embraces being racist against Tuskens and many people that he doesn't like.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's an interesting. Um, it's interesting. It's interesting to look at all of the races in Star Wars because I would say compared to something like Star Trek, Star Wars is a melting pot of an incredible amount of different cultures. I mean, we see Dexter Jetster, and we only see one or two other versions of that kind of four-armed hulking alien. Whereas in Star Trek, it's very much focused on a small handful of prominent alien races.
Yeah. Dexter's a basilisk, Connor. You need to get with the program. Also, primarily seen as the brutal and fallen to the dark side Jedi, as seen by the basilisk general Pong Krell, who murders so many of his own men that his own men turn on him, led by Captain Rex.
So like that, there's so many more instances for culture to show up in Star Wars just because it is, with every new show they have, they create nine more species. There's the dog-faced aliens. Um, But again, in Star Trek, it's like humans versus the Vulcans, humans versus the Andorians, humans versus the Romulans, and it's very much like focused on the political side of those relationships. Where here it's well, there are politics. I would say it's just more culture and more so just showing the diversity of the universe.
Yeah, and then now we have the only non-human like main character we've had in Star Wars for a long time that's not a droid has been Chewbacca. But now we're starting into the Ahsoka show where primary main characters will include Ahsoka herself, who is a Togruta, and Hera Syndulla, who is a Twi'lek, as previously explored. And even something like Tales of the Jedi, a recent show that had episodes focused on Ahsoka, shows Togruta society and their tradition of hunting and marriage and child rearing.
So I think it's safe to say that this is probably our first installment of Star Wars Aliens, but as the series continues to develop and evolve, we'll likely return to discuss more species and maybe ones that we didn't cover in depth this time around.
Yeah, if you have any aliens you would like us to cover, please just drop us a comment on our subreddit at reddit.com/r/talking Star Wars. Leave a comment on YouTube or wherever else you find this episode.
We'll read them because we care. And we're not large enough yet in popularity for the comments to be overwhelming because there haven't been any yet.
Connor, you're letting your chip on your shoulder show. So please let us know what you think. We're happy to cover any alien races. Definitely on the docket for next time will be the Ambarans, the Togruta, and others that we have not talked about today.
Oh, the Gungans.
And the Gungans. Have to talk about the Gungans and how, much like Chewbacca cannot be a sole representative of the Wookiees, we cannot let Jar Jar Binks be a sole representative of this warlike culture.
No matter how much of a stain he leaves, but...
All right, join us next time for more Star Wars.
We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.